Well, welcome everyone to our third at home this year. My name is Lynn Hults and I'm one of the committee of the 19th century dress and textiles reframed group. I see that we of course, we're an hour ahead, which may be why people will be trickling in slightly later since the clocks jumped forward an hour overnight. So there'll be people joining us hopefully as we go through the session this afternoon. It'd be great to know where you're joining us from, so do post in the chat box so that we can see what part of the world you're dialing in from. But I see there are lots of people from all over the world already joining us today, which is great. The slide up on the screen is instructions on how to navigate Zoom. So just a few housekeeping rules if you've got any problems. If we could ask everybody please to mute themselves during the talks, just so that we don't get any feedback sound there, that would be great. You can leave your videos on if you wish, or if you're having a problem with bandwidth, you can turn your video off, and that will help. We're having 3 papers this afternoon of around sort of 10 minutes each. And there will be questions after each paper. So we're not grouping the questions all together at the end. So speaker questions, speaker questions, speaker questions. And my colleague, Suzanne Rowland, will be overseeing the Q&A session for me, for which many thanks, Suzanne. As Veronica's already mentioned, we're recording the session this afternoon because we'll be putting the session live on our video channel in due course. If you would like to start posting questions, I mean, as soon as the speakers are delivering their papers, please do so in the Q&A, or any comments that you have, do pop them into the chat box. If you'd like to ask questions at the end of the paper, please feel free to ask in person, but if you could just put your hand up, there's actually a link in the chat box where you can raise a hand if you're a participant, or at least in the participant box, or I should say, you can raise your hand and Suzanne will see that and invite you to ask your question in person if you would so like to do so. So our 3 speakers today are Mary Schoeser, Courtney Wilder and Thomas Cooper. And Courtney will be joining us from New York. So we're just hoping that she'll be with us very shortly, but we are aware of the clock change. So we may just swap round the order of the final 2 speakers to accommodate Courtney, make it a bit easier for her. But let me introduce our first speaker, and I'm delighted to welcome my colleague and good friend, Mary Schoeser, whom I'm sure will be known to many of you. Mary is a Senior Research Fellow at the Victoria and Albert Museum. She's president of the Textiles Society and patron of the School of Textiles in Coggeshall, amongst many other activities that she's involved with. She's written numerous books and articles, amongst which are World Textiles, A Concise History, which was published in 2003, and I see is going to be reissued next year in 2022. Silk from Yale University Press in 2007, and that wonderful volume, Textiles, The Art of Mankind, which was published in 2012 and 2013. She's also curated or contributed to over 40 exhibitions, her most recent one being Chintz, the show which is going to be opening at the Fashion and Textile Museum on the 18th of May, which I'm very much looking forward to. She's currently working on 19th century silk in Spitalfields and in East Anglia, and that's going to be the subject of her talk today, the production of silk and metallic thread gauzes made in Spitalfields between 1806 and 1820. Mary, I'm going to hand over to you if you would like to share your screen, please.
Excuse me. Thank you, Lynn. You've exhausted me with that list of things that I've done. I'm worn out already. Well, hello, everybody. Hello and welcome. I will dive straight in to say, first of all of the images that you're going to see come from a volume in the Clothworkers, the V&A storage center, numbered T.379-1972. So so you won't see it on the screen endlessly. And there is one exception, and I will tell you when we get to that exception. Now, the one you're looking at, I hope you can see clearly, says up the side, silver, gold, tinsel, and tinsel. This is one of the few examples from this volume, T379, that's illustrated in Natalie Rostein's Silk Designs of the 18th Century, that comprehensive, amazing book, Thames and Hudson, 1990, paperback 96, but abridged. And it's important for that reason in terms of the little bit of debate that I want to raise. In other words, Natalie actually commented on this, and that was unusual because on the whole, the reason I'm looking at the post-1800 holdings of these sorts of volumes, records at the Clothworkers, is that Natalie focused on the 18th century. She did, however, come forward just a little bit. And as I say, this is one of the ones she looked at. And it's, as far as I know, an exceptional, the one and only example that's showing the development of a replacement metal thread. So you see at the bottom the real silver and the real gold, and then you see above the tinsel versions of them. And note especially how the real gold appears to be too orange to our eye. I think we have become accustomed to seeing gold as the shade at the top of the screen, rather than the very orange shade at the bottom. And it's at this period that visualization of metal threads actually changes. And it's a development that thus far no one has studied, as far as I know, in terms of technically what differences were between the two metals and how they were made. But it does mark a significant turning point in this complex story that I'm going to very briefly try to cover. Now, this is inside a volume that is labeled, inscribed, quote, 1795 to 1833, J and J Ham, figured gauzes, gold and silver tissues. It does, however, despite its date up to 1833, seem only to go to 1821. The years are noted on the tops of the pages, and you can perhaps make that out here. Well, actually, you can't, because I'm saying to myself, this dates from circa 1816, this example. But many of the pages are dated, so this makes it a very, very valuable piece of evidence for us. And more importantly, really, I think for this topic today, the technical details are also given. So are the names of the journeymen and the mercers. And that also is important part of this story. Now, J&J Ham means Jourdain and John Ham, who operate in Spitalfields from 1808 to 1832. This firm descends from Bachelor Ham and Perigal, well covered in Natalie's book. Bachelor was weaving Garthwaite designs in 1744 and 1745. But despite this pedigree, the J&J Ham descending from Bachelor, Natalie generally dismisses this run of volumes. And so we're going to go forward and I hope begin to tease out why or how. Now I need, I need a little button that's going to tell me normally. There we go. Thank you. So surprisingly, we're looking at Josephine Bonaparte at Malmaison, very famous image by Francois Gérard, painted in 1807. It's here because what I've come to realize is that it's very difficult to find images of gauze type fabrics. And this, it seems to me, is the best one. It's always assumed to be, because of its period, to be cotton and possibly Dhaka muslin. Thank you, Lynn, for the article. I've had it from 3 other people as well. Dhaka muslin, an attempt, the very finest muslin, an attempt now being made to make it again in India. But given these volumes, the more immersed I become in them, I've begun to ask myself whether or not this kind of fabric might be silk. It certainly looks like silk. And now in these volumes, in T79, 379, we have samples, as you see on the bottom right. And I will not apologize for the bad photographs. It's really the best one can do. The phone, one needs an old-fashioned camera. The phone struggles to focus on these minutely three-dimensional surfaces. So I hope you'll get a sense. There are several examples, and I hope there's enough for you to actually see what these cloths look like. Cotton, as I say, seems always to be assumed for the neoclassical garb that you see her wearing, but this volume suggests otherwise. And as you can see, adjacent to the gauze is a sample dated 1806, so we know that this gauze is also 1806. So looking at sources anew, like La Belle Assemblée, here an image from about 1813, one again begins to think, is the assumption that this is cotton the correct assumption? Because next to it on the right, you have another example of one of these silk and metal thread gauzes. And I think it's very tempting, especially with the sleeves of the garment you see on the left, and actually the neck infill, to just wonder whether this isn't depicting something much more like our metal threads gauzes. Here are details of 3 of these sorts of cloths, more than 3 really, and there in this volume there is an extraordinary range of approaches to the metal thread gauzes, and there are also cloths that are not gauze but metal thread. So I'm just showing you a range of things. These date from 1811 to 1815. They are, in particular, aside from the weave structures, an excellent example of fashionable colors, because these volumes, although a little bit battered and you can see rumpled in some cases, they have really not seen the light of day. And so you really get a chance to see immediately, directly, what the fashionable shades were. And I found it very interesting to find this, what would you call it? Sort of soft wine, slightly mulberry shade, consistently appearing in this period between 1811 and 1815. There are also very interesting weave structures. This book, I'll remind you, is figured gauzes and gold and silver tissues. And just 2 further examples. On the left, velvets. You can see very clearly they're woven by Hodges in August 1817. 480 is the number of threads in the warp doing that particular action described there, and 512 describes the remainder of the actions, and 416 one purple pick, 12 lambs. It's very difficult to read these. One has to, of course, you all have experience of getting used to this, but very interesting to see small scale velvets with such intense use of gold and metal thread. And these quite possibly are for men's vestings, although they could have been for women's clothing as well. On the right hand side are brocades or tissues, that is with the continuous thread supplementary running at the back rather than being turned around and just located in the design area. And the velvets date from 1817, and the tissues brocades date from 1820. Again, as likely to be for men's vestings as for women's clothing. So a general shot of a page, excuse me, of 1820, including notation that this is for Robarts and Company, that will be the mercer. So I'd like you to think of all those fashion plates that show these little spotted motifs of all sorts. And think again, that just propose to self that they might not be representing a cotton cloth, although that is, as I stress, always the assumption. Natalie says that development of tinsel deprived so-called glitzy fabrics of their cachet, but it's very hard to prove in terms of production quantity, because T379 is the only book containing these. This is a very discontinuous series of books into the 19th century, unlike the 18th century records at the V&A. It's certain, however, and so I'm showing you on the left just the range of the variety of ways in which they used the metal threads to create cloths that were more or less intensely decorated, laden with the metal thread. But by the time we get to 1825, it's clear that furniture cloths are beginning to be woven. And this is a major step, the beginning of an entirely different story for Spitalfields as they move away from the creation, certainly of women's dress fabrics. They still continue with men's, that remains very important, but they actually move towards furnishings. Excuse me. And this on the right is the single image from a different volume, T385, which I refer to as mine, because it's the one I keep going back to. And trying to get to the bottom of. It's a separate volume dating from 1816 to 1826, so it overlaps or sits within the larger date of 1795 to 1833 of the volume we have been focusing on. And it's still a puzzle to me how to interpret that distinction, because this too is a J&J Ham book. So clearly it's been kept separately to mean something separate, and that I haven't yet worked out, and may never work out, frankly. Really, I'm sharing this partly because I have 2 more days allocated to me at the end of April, if one's able to get there to the Clothworkers. And then, as you will all know, the Clothworkers closes for 5 years. By the time it opens, I'm going to be 76. It will be nearby in Stratford, very convenient for me, thank you very much. But I'm just not sure, actually, that I'm going to be able to retain all this intense knowledge about these pages. And so I'm hoping that someone younger and with more energy and will become enthusiastic about this topic, because trust me, there is so much to know, to learn from these volumes. I've only given you a little glance. In relation to what you're looking at here, what's significant is this is the volume that presents by 1825, the first written notation of the use of the jacquard in England. It was patented in 1820, but the first written record is 1825 surviving. What's consistent throughout these 2 books also is the mention of Coopers. That's the name you see up above. I'm wondering if Thomas might be related. It would be, I mean, it's not an unusual name, but Cooper was D and P Cooper were silk mercers to His Majesty. From 1805 to at least 1836. I can't find them beyond 1841. So we know that these books are full of royal orders, and that makes them meaningful, again, in all sorts of other ways. The Cooper, as I say, appears not just on the right in T385, but also throughout T379. Now, I stress these are both J&J Ham books, so they clearly were in the hands of the same master weaver. But on J&J Ham, and going back to Natalie and her assessment of their position, she doesn't even accord them a separate entry in her book. She umbrellas them under Bachelor, Ham, and Perigal, so she doesn't see them as having any distinct identity. What she also says is, industrial procedures, I'm quoting, remained unchanged. The spots and small sprigs, we should be looking at the last image, the spots and small sprigs are also reminiscent of the 1790s. The only change she does mention is the notation of the jacquard. But in fact, what is so critical to understand is that Natalie was a brilliant design historian, and these books let her down by being full of not design, but technical developments, really astonishing technical developments. And as I say, there's much more to say about that and much more to know about that. These cloths deserve to be analyzed very, very carefully, because they may look to you to be all just gauzes, just with some gold thread in them, but they are often very, very different cloth constructions. So here's an industry that's responding to the fashion for lightweight fabrics and paddling like mad, aiming to come up with new innovative cloth structures to keep servicing their customers. So we know that there were royal orders, and that too is, as I say, significant. The exciting find was this. Hilary Davidson, a researcher from Australia, was in the Clothworkers, as it happened by luck, on the same day that I was looking at T379. She was looking at Regency dress and had this particular garment out on the table behind me. It's just amazing when that happens. And here you can see, and I've juxtaposed it with an example from a T379. And trust me, in person, one can see that these are identical cloth constructions. The dress is cotton with an overlay of this silk metal thread lino gauze. It shows us the reality of searching for information about garments of this period, because you can see, I mean, it's a miracle that it survived. Well, it is a miracle it survived, and an important miracle, because it actually demonstrates how fragile these dresses are and why they have not survived into the present day and become part of the literature and understanding of dress at the period. The cotton, on the other hand, you can see is looking perfectly healthy. One of its advantages being that it is a much stronger fabric, certainly when constructed as a solid piece of cloth. We also know from this order, I hope you can see bottom right, this is an order that is for, it's hard to, it looks as if it says D Cook, who is our silk mercer to the king. So we know that this cloth was being made for royal customers. And so presumably we might conjecture that this is the sort of gown that would have been worn at a royal soiree. A final little reason to ask oneself how much cotton dominated truly fashionable garments of this period is simply to recall etiquette that still expected women of a certain rank to be garbed in silk once you passed a certain stage of the day. And so that's really what I want to say, to accept in relation to Coopers and to say there is an entirely different story. Cooper and Beckwith, a younger Cooper and Beckwith join up together. Beckwith is the name that it is tied to the provenance of these books. They went into the hands of Beckwith, still tracking down Beckwith, don't quite know, except to say another fantastic coincidence, another lecture, is that Beckwith, for a time in the 19th century, was employing weavers in Coggeshall. I'm pointing back over my shoulder, just over there, 2 streets over there. Beckwith actually had velvet weavers in Coggeshall. So it's become a very intimate story. And you can see there's a great deal more. There's a great deal more. There's 10 years of research in these 2 volumes alone. So that's it.
Mary, thank you so much for an absolutely wonderful introduction to the subject. I very much look forward to seeing more research on this. Are you planning to write a book on the subject of these early, specifically this period, or is it looking at silk right throughout the first half of the 19th century?
Yeah, there was discussion when, in the old days, if you see what you mean, with Mark Eastman when he was still head of publications at the V&A, to do something based on these early Clothworkers volumes. She says, does that answer your question? I'm not, you know, it's the cost of, yes, I'm always, you know, I'm always wanting to write things down. This needs a lot more research. I mean, the more I research it, the more I realize that I really have opened up an area. Perhaps Natalie actually in the end didn't look at it because she recognized how complex this period is. It's just absolutely everything is changing. There is no consistency really, except that there are still small patterns which she recognizes as being kind of similar to the 1790s. But otherwise, absolutely everything is changing. You know, so I don't know what the answer to that question is. Now one would have to pay the V&A to use the images in a book. And as all of you will know, it's really licensing fees that to a large degree determine whether a book is deemed to be a viable publication. So I think it is half my willingness and half the probability or not probability of a publisher being prepared to risk publishing on such an esoteric subject? Because I'd really like to focus on, sort of 1800 to 1825. It's 1823-26, in that period when the Spitalfields, Spitalfields Acts are removed. The barrier against imports of French silks is removed. And so, the jacquard is introduced. So that's a natural place to end. Otherwise, you go into another period of massive change. So yes, Lynn, I would, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Watch this space, I think, is the
answer. Yeah.
I'm going to hand over to Suzanne Rowland, who's looking after the questions in the chat. Suzanne.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you so much, Mary. What a fabulous collection of images you've shown us today. I've got some questions for you. Firstly, from Veronica, who appreciates your images. She said they really showcase the colours and sparkle of dress and textiles during the period. She wonders if you have any idea of the cost of the fabrics, because she assumes they were quite exclusive.
No, short answer is no. One would like to, and that's on the list. That's kind of 12th down on the list of things that I intend to get to seek some contextual information about the prices. But there is nothing directly in these books. And at the moment, I'm aiming to just draw out everything I can get from the books before I go on to any other material. But yes, very, very, very expensive, very expensive.
Yeah, well, it's understandable given the short amount of time you've got left in the Clothworkers Centre. You have to make that count. Another question from Katerina. Do you suppose these lightweight silk gauzes, she says non-metallic, she guesses, could have been used for day dresses as well?
Well, they could have been, of course. One can do what one likes with fabrics, but I suspect, I mean, certainly the gauzes, there are gauzes in this volume that are non-metallic, and they are just impossible to photograph. You know, it's the presence of the metal thread that gives you enough of a change of color to show you what's going on. Certainly silk gauzes, absolutely. And it's important to remember that the bobbinet machine, 1809 Heathcote, was also being developed in this period. And again, responding, one assumes, to the fashion for lighter weight fabrics. And bobbinet was a silk fabric initially. So there's tangential information that suggests there's a consumer appetite for very lightweight gauze structure silks. But the metal thread, I think, even though the tinsels made the cloth cheaper, I think still the cost would mean unlikely that they were worn during the day.
Yeah, thank you. From Anna, do descriptions of silk gauzes appear in literature of the period, like Jane Austen, for example?
Well, yes, you tell me. That's on number 15 on my list of things that need to be done. Yes. So I would hope so, but no, I haven't got there yet. I have to, hold myself back.
Yeah. There've been a few requests for the title of Natalie's book that you mentioned. But
yes, yeah. It's Silk Designs of the 18th Century, published by Thames and Hudson, 1990. And there is a paperback edition, 96, but that is abridged. So, you get what you pay for.
Yeah. And Robin has actually put a link in the chat for everyone as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, Veronica makes the comment that it sounds like a collaborative research project is needed, Mary.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please. I have actually requested, and perhaps it's impolite to be saying this, I have actually requested that the 4 volumes that are particularly important for this research actually be transferred from the Clothworkers to the research department of the V&A. So that they could remain accessible. But thus far, I've had no response to that. And I'm not optimistic, because after all, it would be unfair, because every research fellow wants to have their stuff transferred into the research department, I assume. But I think I'm the only person who asked.
Okay.
So maybe with the retrieval, the saving of the V&A, the NAL, the library, which now isn't going to suffer the cuts that were threatened, maybe it might be possible. But yeah, it would be, as the V&A did the Lemon research project, these volumes would be perfect to do a large joint research project. Absolutely perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, Veronica makes the point that you would get lots of offers after your paper today.
Well, yes, please. Yes.
Yeah. A question from Robin. She says that it also seems like a great project for technical study. Has any technical or scientific analysis been done? She suggests TCC or somewhere else.
No. The answer to that is yes. I was doing little mini seminars at the Clothworkers myself. So I had Bob Macon, for example, who's now retired from Gainsborough Silks, in to look at the construction. There are several whole other lectures. So these volumes also show evidence of the mechanical drawboy, which is an invention that's been forgotten between the draw loom and the jacquard, and very, very, very important evidence of that technical development. And I had Bob in because he was the last person really with the skills to do the draft papers, had gone from working with hand jacquard weaving through into computerized. They now just do it by computer. So anyway, Bob came to look, yes, and we counted the number of wefts that were needed to make a tiny little spot motif, and it was more than 40, and so that determined that it could not be woven on even a very complex shaft loom. So it had to be, we think, the drawboy. So we've been fascinating things like that. Mary Restio has been in because I should mention that she's one of the greatest ikat dyers in this country. There are examples of ikat. No one has studied dyeing in Spitalfields. Very important, again, why I stress the importance of seeing the colors in these volumes. No one has studied dyeing, and she has confirmed that the samples are real ikat. They are not shine, they are not printed on the warp. They are actually properly dyed threads prior to entering into the loom. We've also had we began, I'm taking up too much time, but really I'm saying yes, we have begun to analyze we want to analyze the gauzes. The plan had been for me to make the list. You can see all these technical details that are there with the cloth. They tell you on the whole they tell you who the weaver is, they tell you often who the merchant is. More importantly, they tell you the cloth construction. And so the plan was for me to in advance of the sort of joint workshop on this, to actually make a list, to pick a cloth type and see how consistently it appeared throughout the books, and how the technical details varied, because it makes an enormous difference. These 1000N cloths versus a 480N cloth, for example, really makes a big difference to the structure. So yeah, there's yes, well, you got me started now, you see. So there's just it's remarkable. The downside is, I have to stress that these are two singular books that seem to sit without preceding and following volumes. So what you can't do, you just have to keep your mind within the date frame that is covered by the book, and you can't make too many assumptions. Certainly afterwards, you can compare to the later 18th century volumes that are at the V&A, but again, there isn't a consistent run all the way through.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we'll pass back to Lynn now. If anyone has questions for Mary, please keep posting them in the chat.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, and thank you, Mary, for, I think you've generated an awful lot of conversation there, and I know there'll be more going on for that after this.
Good.
Right, I'd like to introduce our second speaker today, Courtney Wilder, who's joining us from New York. Courtney is the Jane and Morgan Whitney Fellow in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and she's completing her doctoral thesis in the history of art at the University of Michigan. And she was looking at the links between printed styles of textiles in the second quarter in the 19th century and the broader realm of print media. The subject of her paper this afternoon is the eccentric style found in printed textiles from the early 1820s. Thank you, Courtney, and I'll hand over to you if you'd like to share your screen, please.
All right, thank you so much, Lynn. And my apologies for completely missing this UK time change that happened last night.
No worries.
Sorry about that.
I think several of us here also woke up this morning and went, oh, right, okay, we've gone forward an hour.
Yeah, we had ours like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I don't know, time has no meaning for anyone anymore, so that further complicates things.
Absolutely, no problem.
All right, so can you see my screen all right? I'll just
Yes.
maximize here. Okay.
Brilliant, that's fine. Thank you, Courtney.
Great. Okay, so I'm really thrilled to be presenting to this group, so thank you for having me. And I'll just jump right in. So thinking about the theme of research joy, I think we all miss being in rooms together. And for me, being in a room researching means flipping through pattern books. So I'm gonna do a kind of pretend we're all in the library in the upstairs of Platt Hall. Maybe some of you guys have been in there. So pretend we're there, we're flipping through this pattern book from the mid 1820s, and we stumble upon this page and we're all immediately just taken aback by what we see on the right hand in particular, where if we lean closer, we see that these printed textiles exhibit this amazing intricacy and kind of almost dazzling array of linear patterns that create optical illusions and that interweave in ways that it's difficult to follow with the eye. And in fact, these would have been quite difficult, if impossible, to imitate by hand. So these patterns really exemplify some of the new technologies that were really coming into their own by the 1820s, in particular cylinder printing. And you can see an illustration of that in the lower center. This didn't fully displace block printing, which was the traditional method of printing textiles. You see that on the left. And then you also see in the very rear of this image, some people are still doing block printing. However, cylinder printing expedited the process just in unimaginable ways. And it also made the resulting textiles much cheaper and more inexpensive. So really expanding the audience for printed textiles. And these machine printed textiles we're seeing here really exemplify that. So if this aesthetic looks somewhat familiar to you, it might be because it's also known as guilloche, and this is an aesthetic that is engraved using a rose engine turned lathe, and it's very common on things like snuff boxes or on watch cases, and it may also look familiar to you from paper money and other security documents. And so it is in fact from paper money and experiments in designs for banknotes that this aesthetic came to printed textiles. And so in this area of my research, I'm especially interested in looking at these connections between money and these new machine printed textiles and how we can look at that through the lens of what we might think of as currency. So I'm interested in industrial and commercial currency and how those shifted during this period. Also the international currency of British design in particular. Also fashion and currency, that kind of brings up these ideas of what's up to date, what's new, what's in fashion. And finally, class currency and links to differing economic circumstances, sometimes directly linked to the rise of printed textiles as this huge, huge money-making industry. So I'm gonna just kind of quickly go through some of these themes and how I'm thinking about them with this idea of the eccentric style as a grounding force. And we'll start with the actual way that the style kind of moves from printed money into printed textiles. So some of you may be familiar with the bank restriction period, which begins in the 1790s. And it's basically when the Bank of England during the wars with France needed to suspend cash payments and issue paper currency instead in the form of banknotes. And the banknotes were notoriously like not designed very simple, very easy to forge, and in fact, many were. And this became problematic because even passing a forged note, even if you hadn't intended to, was punishable by death. It was a capital offense. And you can see that pointed out rather accurately in this bank restriction note made by Cruikshank. And people were also very skeptical of this move to paper currency because it was seen as an illusory form of value. How could you turn old rags into something equivalent to gold, for instance, which is what this caricature here, political hocus pocus, is getting at. And so to obviate this problem of mass forgery that was happening, especially in low denomination notes, the Bank of England in 1818 opened up calls for people to submit ideas for new banknote designs. And one of the most frequently suggested designs was the use of engine turning and these kind of rose engine designs, which you see a variety of different forms exemplified on this sample note that was published by the Society of Arts. And one of the most prominent people to submit a proposed design was an American named Jacob Perkins. He had already produced a lot of banknotes for different banks in the United States, and he came over to London to participate in this contest. When his design was not selected, he ended up selling it to provincial banks in London, and he also looked for other ways he could monetize this. And one of those was printed textiles. This was, of course, becoming a huge business right at this time, with cylinder printing taking off. And so he devised a system to engrave the copper cylinders with the same kind of eccentric designs that he was putting on paper money. However, there are some fascinating letters in the collection of the Royal Philatelic Society in London that show that he was not great at this new business. And a lot of his customers are writing saying, you know, the cylinder's not working, the engraving's too light. P.S. I sent it back to you and I never heard from you again. So it was not going well for Perkins and his partner Heath in the printed textile industry. And his agent in London or in Manchester also wrote saying, there's also people imitating the style here in Manchester, so we're kind of in trouble here. And in fact, they definitely were. One of the most prominent cylinder engravers in Manchester, a man named Joseph Lockett, had actually partnered with another Manchester textile printer who had submitted a design to the Bank of England. And this man was John Lee Bradbury, whose design you see here on the left, which I was able to see in the Bank of England Museum. And you can see how his kind of very almost spirograph style translated into designs for printed textiles that Joseph Lockett ended up making. And Lockett was just really ingenious in how he really played up the ability of this style of textile design to vary to infinity. You could create all kinds of new designs just by changing a setting on the lathe. And he really learned how to harness the lathe's ability and to channel it into these repeating forms that were well suited to dress textiles in particular. And so these designs actually also gained quite a high level of international currency. They were exported everywhere from India to Brazil, and you can see them clearly standing out from other more typical types of designs pictured with them. And they really signaled a British origin for the textile, and thus a kind of British imperialism in terms of taking over markets and being able to undersell the local producers with these machine-made designs. And probably one of the most important export markets that opened up at this time in 1825 was actually France. You still couldn't export British textiles to France, but you could export engraved copper cylinders. And so French producers saw the benefits of this style and ordered quite a few cylinders from Joseph Lockett. And these are records from the Conservatoire National des Arts Métiers in Paris, which actually show the representations of the cylinders with the swatches of what was engraved on that cylinder. So they're just incredible records. And these two producers, one based in Alsace and one based in just outside Paris, actually won gold medals at the 1827 French exhibition of industrial products with these designs that they had ordered from Britain. So this kind of reverses the typical idea of French dominating in design and Britain kind of following, although it also blurs that because this is a very technically dependent design. So I want to move into talking about the fashion currency and whether this actually did have fashion currency and what kind of fashion currency, because it's a little difficult to tell. For instance, this is the only extant dress that I know of that has these kinds of designs. This was printed in Susan Green's really indispensable guide called Wearable Prints, and it's in the Genesee Country Museum in Western New York. So I'm hoping to go see that at some point. But if you have any examples, please email me, get in touch. So when it was first introduced, the British press seemed fairly enthusiastic and really positive about its prospects as fashion, and in fact predicted that from their extreme delicacy, they were expected to be taken up by the upper circles of society. This doesn't really seem to have happened, even though you can kind of imagine how these might have looked in a retail setting. They would really capture your eye, and they also exemplified the need to create increasingly more diverse arrays of novel patterns to continue attracting new customers into very fashion. But I kind of recently looked through every issue of the Journal des Dames de Mode, which, thank you, Galaga from the BNF, I was able to do from home here. And the representation of printed textiles in their fashion plates is extremely minimal in the period when eccentric textiles were first being produced and even being shown at the French Exposition of Industrial Products, where they got rave reviews from industrial commentators. However, fashion journals did not seem to even notice that this was a thing at all. So it's still very unclear to me whether these actually were picked up as a style. Fashion plates tended to focus on more expensive fabrics like silks, and they're slightly more conservative in the fabrics, even if the fashions themselves got increasingly bizarre during this period with the massive sleeves and things like that. So I'm kind of interested also in the idea of fashion as currency and ideas like Veblen's idea of pecuniary culture, where social class is articulated through the expense of what you're wearing. And that's also captured here in this caricature by Daumier of a dress made of banknotes. So kind of appropriate and kind of ironic that a printed textile made from a aesthetic register that resonates with printed money would actually signal the opposite. It would signal a cheap textile, something that was inexpensive. And it also signaled imitation. So something cheap trying to look expensive. The eccentric style was really good at imitating things like moire and watered silks. So it also kind of came to signify commerce more generally, not just banknotes and paper money, but also advertising and the kind of tags that would accompany all kinds of mundane products. So here you see the eccentric aesthetic used on tags produced for everything from industrial expositions to champagne, to bear grease, to textiles themselves. So this also kind of signifies the need in an emerging commercial society to really be a smart consumer and to be able to tell something that's false from something that's authentic and true. And you can see that in everything from paper currency to textiles to things like lottery tickets, all of which use the same, quote, inimitable eccentric aesthetic during this period. And in Britain, by the 1840s, the eccentric style, especially as it was made by prominent producers such as Thomas Hoyle and Sons, really did come to be seen as a working class aesthetic. For example, in the Penny magazine here, a working class periodical, they take their readers on a tour of Hoyle's printworks in Lancashire. And I've even found reference in Elizabeth Gaskell's novel Mary Barton to this eponymous character, Mary Barton, wearing a Hoyle's gown. And she's the daughter of a textile worker who works as a seamstress. So this had really come to be a working class textile by the 1840s. And so in that kind of variance between it being predicted to be a kind of textile for the upper circles when it first emerged to this kind of cycle down the fashion hierarchy to a working class textile, I think also mirrors the real volatility of the industrial market during this period and the kind of commercial market that emerged alongside it. We see, as seen in this quote here, the fact that in the snap or in the blink of an eye, bankruptcies could occur, and even, rich producers could be reduced to nothing after one of these commercial crises took place. And so we see that in this cartoon here, where this woman's trying to sell a used coat by saying it used to belong to a banker, maybe you'll find banknotes sewn into the lining. And it's also exemplified too by this producer, Javal Frere in Paris, who bought quite a few cylinders from Joseph Lockett in the 1820s, but was out of business by the early 1830s. And contemporary commentators always commented on how much capital he had invested in his business to kind of create this state-of-the-art British-like production facility. And so, of course, the bigger the investment, the bigger the fall. And on the other end, these crises that became more and more regular also put workers at an especial risk. And for them, especially in a precarious economic position, they would often have to use things like their clothing to survive through things like pawn. And what's interesting to me too is that in Beverly and Lemire's study of pawn and used clothing, we often see women pawning their clothing, whereas men pawn watches. Kind of they're mirroring the economic divide between the sexes in the working class. And it's interesting that both of these items, watches and clothing, could bear this eccentric aesthetic. So I just want to conclude, and I'm sorry if I've taken up too much time here, but we started in Manchester at Platt Hall, and I want to kind of end by taking us back to Manchester 200 years ago. I was really excited to read in this 1823 guide to Manchester that there's mention of both printed textiles using cylinders and also used clothing. And so it kind of creates that circuit that I'm interested in between these two things in a kind of modern marketplace. So he tends to, while the author is taking you on this tour through Manchester, he tends to break out into verse from time to time about certain places that the tour is passing. So when he passes the workshop of the cylinder engravers, Wolfenden, Stones, and Kirkham, he says, "Through scientific cylinders impressed with wondrous arts, on vestments white, to life a new creation starts." And I was amazed that on the very next page, the next stop on the tour was at this used clothing stall belonging to a man named William Tuer. And of that, he also wrote a couplet, and it goes as follows: "So good, so cheap are all thy cast-offs, William Tuer, thy lane's not Sugar Lane, but old Rosemary, sure." So Rosemary here invoking the melancholy quality of used clothing. And so I think in conclusion, having those two verses side by side in this 1823 tour of Manchester really exemplifies the cycles of the currency of this particular textile style that I'm examining. And I look forward to your thoughts and questions on it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Courtney, for an absolutely wonderful paper. Gosh, some of those textiles really are quite bizarre, aren't they, and eccentric, but amazing, and amazing to see the sort of social progression, I think, during that period. I'm going to hand over to Suzanne for questions, please, Suzanne.
Thank you, Lynn, and hello, Courtney. Lovely to see you.
Hi, Suzanne. Great to see you.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for taking us all to Platt Hall with you to share some of your research joy. I think we all really enjoyed that. And as Alison Matthews David commented, we miss Platt Hall, we miss going there. And so that takes me to our first question, which is from Alison. She says, this is totally fascinating, and I'm just wondering what the connotations of the word eccentric meant at the time and in relation to these particular textiles. Was it just used in the UK?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it, because I have an answer for it. So eccentric really refers to, it can mean several things. So technically it means an elliptical attachment to the rose engine turning lathe. So this was called an eccentric lathe. But of course it also did mean something that was unusual or odd or bizarre. And there's a really fascinating book by the scholar Miranda Gill that looks at eccentricity in the French cultural imagination in the first half of the 19th century. And she kind of traces the movement of the word and kind of the different cultural valences of it, where the French thought the English were eccentric, that was an inherently English quality, but increasingly due to things like the spread of fashion, it became a more accepted French quality. So I recommend, if you're interested in that, to check out her book. It's really fascinating. And it does a very deep dive into the meaning of that word during this period.
Thank you. Would it be possible just to put the book in the chat in a while, Courtney, when you...
Yes, I will make myself a note to do that.
Okay, thank you. A question from Robin. She says, this is really fascinating, especially the links to printing money. The first thing that this brought to mind is Dutch wax Ankara printed textiles by Blisco. And Robin wonders if that's outside the scope of your research or if you're looking at that as well.
Well, it's funny you asked that. I actually wrote my master's thesis on Yinka Shonavari. So I have looked at Dutch wax a little bit in another era of my academic career. So no, I think he uses the Dutch wax in really fascinating ways as this really intense cultural signifier, especially the kinds that use, like he has one famous piece that uses the Chanel logo in Dutch wax form. So kind of, I think, a comment on the current luxury industry and its class connotations and also kind of imperialist connotations as well. So I think it's a fascinating contemporary touch point, and maybe one of the best forms of printed textiles that continue to really employ contemporary references in interesting ways through pattern and textile.
Okay, thank you. A question and comment from Asadek. Absolutely fascinating paper. Have you published any articles on this research which could be referenced?
Not yet. Yes, I'm finishing up my dissertation and hoping to get something out soon. But I will say that the research for this was actually funded by the Passold and the Victoria and Albert Museum, which I did a few years ago. And so that was with the intention of turning it into an article. So I won't let you down, Passold. Something will come soon.
Fabulous. That's good news to hear. And just perhaps a final comment from Andrea on the meaning of eccentric. I wonder if this relates to the eccentric gears that may have been used in the lathe, but I think you've said that already.
Exactly. Yeah. But it is, it is an interesting word to be attached to the style, because while it is odd and strange, it's also something that's mass produced, and the variance between different versions of the pattern are actually quite minimal. So you kind of wonder, is it eccentric, or is it kind of falling into a fashion where actually conformity is what's being sought? So having something that's unique but not too unique, because I don't think anyone really wanted to be a true eccentric, especially when fashion was concerned. So I think that valence is really interesting to me.
Okay, thank you. There's another question, but it's asked to Mary as well. So I think I'll perhaps leave that till the end, till after Thomas's paper, and then bring it back to both of you. that's okay. But thank you so much, Courtney. I love that. I love your research, and look forward to hearing what you do with it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, and thank you, Courtney, for a wonderful presentation. There's lots of food for thought there. I'd like to turn to our final speaker for this afternoon, Thomas Cooper. And I think we've got to acknowledge that last week, or earlier this week, was May Morris's birthday. So happy birthday to her, which is the subject of Thomas's paper this afternoon. Thomas is a first-year PhD student in the history of art at the University of Cambridge, and a Piggott Scholar at the university. And the subject of his paper is based on his doctoral thesis, which explores May Morris's practice as a designer and maker of textiles, and will look at her engagement with and writing on textiles and her relationship with other figures in the arts and crafts movement and beyond the movement itself. Thank you much indeed, Thomas, for a fascinating introduction to your doctoral research and lots of wonderful avenues that you're going to be exploring. May I just sort of start by asking a question? Because of course, you know, May is very close to my heart as someone specialising in art embroidery and as a practitioner. I just wondered, have you any thoughts on where she sits in regard to, you know, the sort of arts and crafts ideal of the designer maker? How you think she viewed herself in that context? I mean, is she belong to that camp of, you know, in order to be able to make, you need to be able to design, and vice versa? And should the work be conceived by an individual person in the way that, for instance, Lockwood and Glaister suggests that, you know, that's the absolute ideal? I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it may definitely fulfills the ideal of the artist, of the designer maker. There's quite a well-known letter that Mary Lobb wrote in 1939 after her death to someone at the V&A, and she was explaining how where William Morris was able to design very successfully, and May's mother Jane was able to embroider very successfully, May was able to achieve both very successfully. In her guidebook, Decorative Needlework, she does sort of encourage the readers and the students to understand materials and making, but also within that she encourages people to understand what constitutes good design, and just to be aware of those dual aspects of the making of embroidery. I don't know yet. I don't feel I can say yet whether enough she sort of advocated that people should do both, because she does talk about sort of natural instinct, and some people might have a better understanding of design than others. So that's something I want to look into, and also again explore May in relation to this. What essentially is a construct between maker and design. I don't really think it probably exists.
I think it'll be interesting also to see whether it breaks down gender lines, because, you know, when one reads sort of what women writers of the period are saying, and when you look at the male designers, it seems to be the male designers who are suggesting there's no such thing as that ideal, whereas perhaps it's the females who are saying yes there is. And I just want, it'll be interesting to see whether you actually find that there is a gender disparity there in how one approaches that. I don't know, it'll be interesting to see what you conclude from that. I'm going to pass over to Suzanne and see what other questions there are. Suzanne, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you so much, Thomas. That was a wonderful paper. You really brought May Morris to life for people like me who are not so familiar with her. So thank you for that. So a first comment and question from Veronica. Such interesting observations about the implications that a biographical approach to research has for the unintentional exclusion and overshadowing of certain histories. She says you make a great case for foregrounding, making, and materiality. And Veronica would like to know more about how making will form part of your research process.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, at the moment provisionally divide the research into 3 sections. So the first one is stitch, the second one is design, and then the third one is weave. And I want, because I'm really interested just as a personal art historical research way, very interested in making and materiality, I wanted to try and figure out a way of having that really inform the methodology. And I felt this sort of three-part division worked quite nicely. And I'm wanting to use each part and its attached making processes to as a launch point, I suppose, to then think about, as I mentioned, the key debates within the field. So stitch, for example, thinking about how that's a material binding and it physically joins cloth, thread, but also how it might be more of a metaphorical binding between women who collaborate, between mothers and daughters, between sisters, between friends and colleagues. So that's how I'm trying to think about making materiality as a sort of think about them making it as a basic thing, and then from there building up and expanding and widening our sort of the different avenues of inquiry through which we can understand the text.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. A related question from Robin. She says, I'm wondering too, will you incorporate the immaterial, or more accurately, the intangible aspects that may not be clearly represented, tacit knowledge, what might be summarized from her relationships and experiences?
Yeah, definitely. May's writings are going to be hugely important, especially in the current research climate where access to materials and in-person study is limited in some way. So definitely trying to understand May's engagement with making materials through her writings, and the type of bodily knowledge that she is talking about, and often, and I've written about this in my MA dissertation, I think that hasn't fully acknowledged that within May's writings there's an engagement with the imagination and thought processes and intuition. So those are things I'd like to tease out as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. A question and comment from Ingrid Meader. Such a fascinating project. Will your research methodology include remaking any of her works?
No, Ingrid, I'd love to. I don't know if I have the time, but that would be a fantastic project. And I do make embroidery on the side as just a hobby, and I have found that to be hugely helpful in understanding how the stitches are made, and where the hands are positioned, and what the body feels like when a certain stitch is made in a frame or loose in the hand. But it would be fantastic to try and recreate something.
Yeah. So will you incorporate that into your findings, your physical experience of working, as an embroiderer? Will that form any part of your outcome?
It'll definitely inform my own material literacy and breaking down in an almost pedantic way how a stitch is made, or how all the exact process of tracing and pricking and pouncing and rubbing and then blowing away and then redrawing of the design. So I think I will involve it insofar as a thinking process.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question from Kimberly Lamb, who says, a wonderful project. I'm curious how socialism can figure into your focus on making a materiality.
Thank you. Yeah, so I do want to think about that, absolutely, because it's very important for May's politics. The moment I have it planned for Stitch, as I mentioned, I want to think about how Stitch is a site of interaction between women, but also between politics. And May embroidered banners that we used within socialist activity. So it can definitely it fitting into that sort of part of the research. But if anyone has any other suggestions as to where I could perhaps that engagement with her politics, that would be much appreciated.
Thank you, Thomas. That's all the questions that are in the chat. Lynn, how are we doing for time? Do we have time?
Yeah, we could have a couple more questions if there are general questions from people about today. And just one thought I had, Thomas, which would be interesting to have a look at further. I mean, I know May has, when she was on her American lecture tour, she was faced with the question about her views on suffragettes and suffragism. I mean, it'd be interesting to see if one can tease out more about that as well, and where she sees that fitting in with the role of women in society and in the workplace.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to look at the idea of queerness and a queer identity because of the way that May sort of written about her companionship with Mary Lobb, and so I see that interesting queerness also a part fitting into a larger sort of network of ideas around suffrage and perhaps lifestyles that were alternative and more progressive.
Thank you. Suzanne, any other questions coming through?
There's lots of lovely comments for all the presenters, so I hope you get a chance to have a look at how much everyone's been really appreciating your work today. There was just a general question. Perhaps actually could throw this to Mary, Courtney and Thomas. It came from Emily, and she asks about if any written descriptions have been found in magazines as well as material objects in terms of describing the research, I guess, in fashion magazines, perhaps. I guess, Mary, you have said already, maybe yes, you haven't had a chance to look.
Yeah, no, I've already answered that, although I think where I will be looking is, and I see this reflected really in Courtney's Eccentrics as well, is my interest in materiality is, my understanding of materiality is it is the objects, but it's also what's behind it. In other words, the intangible, is that what Robin called it? And what I see in the intangible in these the gauzes, the laces, the bobbinet, and the eccentrics is fragility in relation to society. And I think that literature, both, you know, the popular press, if you like, and novels, do actually provide substantial evidence of the political and social instability through that early part of the 19th century, which one could argue is actually realized in these either literally fragile fabrics or visually very fragile lines that you see in the eccentrics.
I love that. That's a perfect summation, I think, of the way I was trying to articulate what I kind of see as kind of, I don't know, melancholic and kind of poignant, I think, in these contemporary designs. Yeah, and there are some descriptions in contemporary texts, but they tend to be more in texts that were geared towards people interested in industrial design reform or in, on the other side, in just industrial production more generally, not as many in the context of general fashion, and definitely no visual representations. I mean, I think it would be really hard to accurately represent these in a fashion plate, for example, because they are manually inimitable. It's kind of like their signature. So that's an interesting contrast there in their inability to be kind of codified within the visual realm of fashion press.
Thank you. Thomas, are you able to answer this as well?
I'm sorry, you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, it's from Emily. She just wonders if there are any written descriptions found in magazines as opposed to sort of material evidence or images.
Yeah, I imagine there are lots. Certainly in sort of reviews of exhibitions and in publication periodicals like the Studio International Journal. And in a lot of May's writings, she'll describe something that she's seen and that she's talking about from her memory, but she doesn't provide an image or an illustration, and so we have to try and build up an image of what that's like. And that can be sometimes a bit frustrating because she's talking very specifically about something, but we don't know what it looks like. So it's a bit of a fun game sometimes with May, just trying to figure out what she's talking.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and a huge thank you to our three speakers for three wonderful presentations this afternoon. And we'll be in touch with you and let you know when the recording from today's event will go on our video channel. And I've put up a slide there with all our contact details. You can contact us through the website, through Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and of course on our email address. And our next At Home will be on Sunday, the 25th of April, and details will be posted shortly about that. So thank you to everyone, and I wish you enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and we look forward to seeing you in a month's time. Thank you. Bye-bye.